I never expected to live long enough to talk about this. Most of my career I spent hiding facts, not revealing them. But I am 82 years old. My doctor has given me no more than 6 months, and silence no longer feels like the right or safe strategy. What I saw in Antarctica in 1998, when I was deputy director of one of the divisions at NASA, changed not only my understanding of the world, but, as I now realize, quietly redirected the whole hidden course of humanity's development. There were 4 of us in that group, and I seemed to be the last one still alive. So listen. I will tell everything in order, without embellishment or invention, exactly as it really happened. It all began with a phone call to my office in Houston. It was late on a Tuesday evening. I believe it was May 26th. I had stayed late to finish a report on the Mars Global Surveyor program when the direct government line rang. The one without a dial, with a single button. I picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end belonged to a man I had never met in person, but whose name inspired a certain tremor in every corridor of power. His name was Alton Weiss. At that time, he was the Deputy National Security Advisor. His speech was utterly dry, without any preface. He informed me that at 6:00 a.m. the next morning a car would arrive to pick me up, and that I had to be ready for a trip of unspecified duration. When I reasonably asked about the purpose of the trip and what I should bring, he replied that everything necessary would be provided, and that I would learn the goal upon arrival at the destination. He also added that I was to hand over all my personal electronic devices, including my wristwatch and my pager, to the driver who would come for me. The conversation lasted no more than 40 seconds. I did not sleep the whole night. Calls like that were not exactly unheard of in my line of work, but the level of secrecy and Weiss's involvement indicated something of extreme importance. I headed a department that dealt, among other things, with analysis of data from orbital telescopes and spy satellites operating beyond the atmosphere. We looked for anomalies, not aliens, as the public likes to imagine, but rare geological formations on other planets, unexplained energy bursts, potential threats from deep space. We were the eyes looking not at Earth, but away from it. Why my personal presence had suddenly become necessary, and in such a rush, was completely unclear. I assumed it might be related to some newly discovered object, perhaps a meteorite of unusual composition or origin that had fallen to Earth. But even in that case, the procedure looked excessively classified. Exactly at 6:00 a.m., a black, unmarked sedan pulled up to my house. The driver, a silent man in a dark suit, checked my NASA ID, took my briefcase with work documents that I had brought along just in case, as well as my watch and pager. In exchange, he handed me a simple plastic bag with toiletries and a change of underwear. We drove for about an hour and arrived at a small private airstrip outside the city, where a nondescript business jet was already waiting for us. On board, besides the pilots, there were 2 more people. One I recognized, Dr. Elias Vance, a leading geologist from the California Institute of Technology, with whom NASA frequently consulted. The other I saw for the first time. He introduced himself as Commander Carmack O'Neill, an officer of the U.S. Navy Special Operations Forces. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but his bearing and manner left no doubt about his profession. No one told us where we were flying. There were no maps or screens in the cabin. The windows were covered with opaque shades. Elias looked as confused as I felt. He tried to crack a few jokes, but they died in the oppressive silence that O'Neill carefully maintained. The commander sat with an impassive face, studying a folder marked Top Secret. The flight lasted about 5 hours, after which we landed. When we were finally allowed to descend the stairs, I realized we were at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. We were immediately led into one of the administrative buildings, into a windowless conference room, where Alton Weiss himself was already waiting for us. Weiss was a short, heavy-set man in his 60s, with a tired face and very attentive eyes. He wasted no time on pleasantries. On the table in front of us lay a single folder, identical to the one O'Neill had been reading. Weiss opened it. Inside was one satellite photograph and several sheets of data. The image was high resolution, showing a section of ice plateau in East Antarctica. At first glance, nothing unusual, an endless white desert. But when Weiss pointed us to the right area and we looked more closely, we could make out a barely visible anomaly, a perfectly circular area about 300 meters in diameter, where the structure of the ice and its reflectivity differed slightly from the surrounding landscape. Then Weiss moved on to the data. These were the results of seismic and ground-penetrating radar scans conducted from a next-generation military satellite. According to the figures beneath that anomalous area, at a depth of about 2 kilometers, there was a vast cavity. But it wasn't just a naturally formed cave. Its roof, according to radar readings, had an impeccably smooth, almost polished surface and formed a regular geometric structure. It was something that could not have been created by nature. And most disturbing of all, inside this cavity there was an object. To the radar it appeared as a massive body with a density far exceeding that of the surrounding rock. It had a complex yet symmetrical shape, and it emitted a weak but stable energy field that defied classification. Weiss explained that the anomaly had first been noticed back in the late 70s, but the technology of the time had not allowed detailed study. It had been under constant observation ever since. A few weeks earlier, one of the new satellites recorded changes in the structure of the field. It hadn't become stronger or weaker, it had become different, as if its frequency characteristics had shifted. That triggered the immediate deployment of an expedition. Myself, as a specialist in extraterrestrial anomalies and data analysis, and Elias as a geologist capable of assessing the structure of the cavity and of the object itself, were chosen as civilian experts to provide an independent evaluation. Commander O'Neill was responsible for security and overall command of the operation on site. We were told that we would fly to Antarctica, to the American Amundsen, Scott's South Pole Station. But that would be only an intermediate base. From there, we would be transported to a specially constructed, strictly classified field camp located directly above the anomaly. That camp, as they explained, had already been operating for several years. Engineers from the U.S. Army Corps had bored a shaft through the 2-kilometer thick ice sheet. The shaft led straight down to the roof of the underground cavity. Weiss finished his briefing with words that still ring in my ears. "Gentlemen, what you are about to see is never to be disclosed, ever. This is not a matter of United States national security. This is a matter of the stability of the entire human species. Your task is to go down, evaluate, and report. We must understand what it is, where it comes from, and whether it poses a threat." He looked each of us in the eye. "Any conclusions you reach, whatever they may be, will remain in this room and in the report you hand to me personally. The world is not ready for this. It may never be ready." After that we were taken into the next room, where we were given sets of extreme polar gear, all without labels or insignia. Then we were loaded onto another plane, this time a C-130 Hercules military transport modified for long-range flights. Inside, besides the 3 of us, there was a group of 12 Special Forces soldiers, also in unmarked gear. They did not talk to us or to each other. They just sat, checking their equipment, their faces hidden behind masks and goggles. The windows were once again sealed. The flight was very long. I lost track of time. We were in the air more than a day, with one mid-air refueling, which I deduced from the change in engine noise. No one told us what territory we were flying over. We were completely cut off from the outside world. At last the plane began to descend. When the wheels touched the runway and we stepped outside, The low-hanging sun stabbed our eyes and the icy air hit our faces. We were at the Amundsen, Scott Station. I recognized it by the characteristic dome of the geodesic observatory, but we weren't allowed to look around. We were immediately transferred to another plane, a small twin otter on ski landing gear. Only Commander O'Neill and 4 of his men came with us. Elias looked pale but tried to keep his composure. I felt strangely calm. The tension of the last days had turned into a kind of detached resolve. We flew for about 3 more hours over an endless white expanse that did not change from horizon to horizon. Eventually, O'Neill pointed downward. I saw a few dark dots on the snow. That was our final destination. The camp consisted of 5 modular buildings connected by covered passages. Nearby stood several tracked vehicles, but the main structure was in the center, a massive drilling rig, more like an industrial complex than a temporary installation. It was surrounded by a security perimeter with several watchtowers. All of this sat in the middle of the ice desert, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest trace of civilization. When we landed, the camp commander, an engineering corps major, met us and led us into the main module. Inside, everything was arranged with military precision: living quarters, a laboratory, a medical unit. All the equipment was state-of-the-art. The major reported to O'Neill that the shaft was fully ready for descent, the lift was operational, life support systems were functioning nominally. He spoke as if about routine maintenance. But in his eyes, I noticed the same tension I had seen in everyone who knew the secret. We were taken to the laboratory where we would work. We were issued special suits that looked like spacesuits, but lighter and more flexible, with a closed breathing system. We were told that the atmosphere in the cavity below was unknown and they couldn't take any chances. Before we started suiting up, Commander O'Neill gathered the 3 of us. He looked at me and Elias. "Doctors," he said, "I have to warn you. Whatever is down there, it has an effect. We don't yet know what kind. The teams that worked on the shaft near the entrance to the cavity couldn't stay there long. They developed headaches and disorientation. Nothing serious, but be prepared. And one more thing. Down there you will follow my orders without question. If I say run, you run. If I say stay silent, you stay silent. Understood?" We nodded. Then something strange happened. O'Neill and his soldiers who were to accompany us began to ready their weapons, but not by loading them. On the contrary, they unloaded them. They removed magazines from rifles, bullets from pistols. All ammunition was collected into a special box, which was then sealed. I asked O'Neill, bewildered, what he was doing. "Orders," he answered curtly. Nothing at all is allowed to go in there armed." From a security standpoint, it was completely illogical. Sending a group into an unknown, potentially hostile environment while disarming them ran counter to every protocol and to common sense. I looked at Elias. He was just as puzzled. It was the first detail that broke the neat, if ominous, logic of the situation. The first, but far from the last. When we, suited up, headed for the lift that descended into the abyss, I realized we were about to face something in front of which rifles and pistols were just useless pieces of metal. And that thought frightened me far more than any armed threat. The lift was a simple metal platform enclosed by mesh, designed for 6 people and some gear. It was not fast. The descent began smoothly, almost soundlessly, except for the faint hum of the winch somewhere above. For the first few hundred meters we were passing through ordinary ice. The shaft walls, lit by dull lamps mounted on the platform, were smooth, with concentric grooves from the drill. The suit kept the temperature comfortable, but I still felt the cold radiating from the ice. Elias stood next to me, his gaze fixed on the pressure gauge on his wrist. The pressure was slowly but steadily increasing. Commander O'Neill and his 3 soldiers stood at the corners of the platform, absolutely motionless. Their faces were hidden, but their posture radiated extreme concentration. They did not look around. Their eyes were directed downward, into the darkness. The descent took almost 30 minutes. I tried to count the time by my pulse but lost track. The sense of separation from the world was complete. We were in a vertical tunnel drilled in an ice shield that was hundreds of thousands of years old. Somewhere up there were our camp, the sky, the sun. Down here there was nothing but ice, metal, and the darkness below. At about 1.5 kilometers down, the walls of the shaft changed. The ice became different, denser, almost black and perfectly transparent. In the light of our lamps it gave off no glare, it seemed to swallow the light. Elias noticed it when I did. He stepped to the edge of the platform and tried to examine the wall more closely. Through my helmet comms I heard his muffled voice. He spoke of crystalline structure, not ordinary glacial ice, but something compressed under such colossal pressure that its molecular lattice had changed, becoming something between ice and quartz. It was a scientific observation, but it brought no comfort. We were descending into a layer of the planet that was never meant to see daylight, where different physical rules seemed to apply. Finally, the platform stopped. We had reached the bottom of the shaft. In front of us was not solid ice, but a floor made of the same black, light-absorbing material. In the center of that floor was a perfectly circular hatch about 3 meters in diameter. It was made of a metal I could not identify, dark, matte, and somehow visually warm, though I knew that was an illusion. One of O'Neill's men approached the hatch and pressed some device to its surface. After a short beep, he turned to the commander and nodded. The pressure beyond the hatch was stable. The atmospheric composition registered as a mixture of nitrogen, oxygen, and inert gases, very close to Earth's surface air, with one peculiarity. There was no carbon dioxide at all, not a single molecule. That was biologically impossible for any closed ecosystem. O'Neill signaled. 2 of his men, working in perfect silence, began turning a wheel inset into the hatch. It opened with unexpected ease. The hatch didn't swing upward. Instead, it retracted smoothly, like the iris of a camera, revealing a passage below. No rush of air, no sound came from within. Only a black hole appeared. We expected to see stairs or a ladder, but there was nothing of the kind. O'Neill came to the edge first. He clipped a safety line to his harness, which one of the soldiers handed him, and simply stepped into the darkness. We watched the rope uncoil, running down out of sight. A minute later his voice came over the radio, calm and even. "I'm down. Ceiling of the vault is about 10 meters above the platform. Visibility limited. Start coming down one at a time." Elias went next, then I. The descent on the rope was short, about 10 meters as the commander had said. When my boots touched solid ground, I unclipped the carabiner. We were standing on a metal platform like the one above, but much larger, about 20 meters across. It was suspended from the roof by several thick cables disappearing upward into the darkness where the shaft's mouth was just visible. The platform was the limit of our engineering intrusion. Beyond it began something else. We were under the dome of a gigantic cavern. I switched my helmet light to maximum and directed the beam upward. The light hit a smooth, mirror-like black surface. It wasn't ice. The material resembled obsidian, but there were no seams, joints, or cracks, just a single flawless monolithic surface curving away into darkness beyond the reach of our beams. We went to the edge of the platform and looked down. Below us, about 100 meters down, lay the floor of the chamber. The chamber itself was enormous. Our spotlights illuminated only small patches, but even from those it was clear that its dimensions exceeded any human-built cathedral or stadium. The space was so vast you could feel the curvature of the floor, and it was completely empty. No columns, no rock falls, just a smooth, light gray surface below and the black dome above. But the strangest thing wasn't that. The strangest thing was the silence. It wasn't oppressive or ringing, it was absolute. Inside the airtight suit, I could hear only my own breathing and the faint crackle of static in the headphones. Outside there was nothing, no echo of our voices over the radio, no hum from the platform machinery. Sound simply vanished, swallowed by the space. Later Elias would suggest that the geometry of the chamber and the properties of its material created a perfect anechoic effect, but at the time it felt simply like total, unnatural stillness. Commander O'Neill checked that we were all right, then led us to the center of the platform where another lift waited, more of an open cage, that descended to the chamber floor. As we were lowered, I stared fixedly at the center of that gigantic underworld. There, perfectly centered, stood the object we had seen in the radar data. From this distance it looked like a huge dark crystal of irregular form, 20 stories tall, its facets, sometimes sharp, sometimes rounded, rising into the half-light. It did not glow. On the contrary, it seemed even blacker than the surrounding darkness, like a hole cut in reality itself. It rested directly on the floor of the hall. There was no visible source of energy at its base, no cables, no lights. When the cage reached the floor, we stepped out. The surface underfoot was solid and slightly rough, like fine-grained concrete. And here below, we first felt what O'Neill had warned us about. It wasn't a headache or nausea. It was a sensation, a faint, elusive feeling that the air around us was vibrating at a very low infrasound frequency. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was constant and all-pervasive. You felt it not with your ears, but with your entire body, every cell. O'Neill ordered us to remain where we were while he and his men walked a few steps toward the object, which was about half a kilometer away. And then I saw something that made me forget the vibration, the strange materials, and the colossal size of the hall all at once. The commander and his soldiers, these highly trained professionals, armed to the teeth, though symbolically disarmed for this mission, reached some invisible line about 400 meters from the object and stopped. Then, slowly, as if on cue, all four dropped to one knee. They weren't praying. They didn't bow their heads. They simply knelt facing the black crystal in a posture which, across cultures, means the same thing, acknowledgement of higher authority. They removed their helmets. It was a direct violation of every safety protocol, but they did it. They knelt there bareheaded, staring at the object. I looked at Elias. Through the helmet visor his face was chalk white. He saw it too. We stood there, two civilian scientists in full protective gear, while ahead of us, the elite of the world's most powerful military knelt before a structure found under the Antarctic ice. And they did it not from fear, not by coercion. Their movements were precise, ritualistic, as if this was not the first time, as if it was part of a protocol that we civilians had not been told about. O'Neill remained like that for about a minute, then rose, donned his helmet, and ordered us over the radio to approach. His voice was perfectly calm. When Elias and I reached them, I noticed another detail. On the wrist of each soldier, strapped over the sleeve, was a small device. Its screen had been dark, but while they were kneeling it had glowed with a steady green light. Now it was dark again. I asked O'Neill what the device was. He looked at me, and there was neither hostility nor secrecy in his voice. He answered as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "That's a dosimeter," he said. "Only it doesn't measure radiation. We still haven't found a name for what it measures. We just call it presence. And protocol requires that when we enter the red zone, the level of your personal presence be 0. My scientist's brain refused to parse that. How could one measure presence? What did it mean to zero it out? But I didn't ask further. I simply looked at the light-devouring black crystal ahead and understood that we had not come here to study. We had come to pay respects. The international treaty banning activity in Antarctica, I realized then, had not been created to protect penguins. It had been created to protect us, from knowledge of what was down here, to ensure no one would accidentally stumble upon this chamber and see what we had seen. Soldiers of the mightiest army on Earth kneeling. We moved forward slowly. O'Neill walked slightly ahead, Elias and I behind him, the 3 soldiers closing our little group. We covered the half-kilometer on foot. There were no vehicles or carts on the floor of the hall. Every step on the rough gray surface sounded dull and echo-less, swallowed instantly by the silence. The vibration grew stronger as we drew closer. It still caused neither pain nor real discomfort, but it created a persistent feeling that I was standing inside some gigantic engine idling in neutral. I checked my suit's readouts constantly: temperature, pressure, air composition. Everything was normal, aside from the complete absence of carbon dioxide. No instrument registered the vibration. It existed outside the range of our equipment. When we were about 100 meters from the object, O'Neill stopped us. "From here on, just you two," he said over the radio. "We'll stay here. Go ahead, take your measurements, do your job. But one rule: do not touch it under any circumstances. Use manipulators and probes only." He pointed to a small toolkit carried by one of his men: a set of remote manipulators, a laser surface scanner, and several sample containers, though I had no idea how we could take a sample of something we were not allowed to touch. Elias and I took the gear and walked on alone. The last 100 meters stretched into eternity. The black mass of the crystal grew, filling our entire field of view. It did not reflect the beams of our lights. Its surface swallowed them whole. When we came within arm's reach, I aimed my most powerful spotlight at one of the facets. The light simply vanished. No glare, no shadow, just nothing. It was like shining into a black hole. That contradicted the basic laws of optics. Even the darkest material reflects some fraction of photons. This reflected nothing. Elias recovered first. He was a geologist to the core and could not ignore such a challenge. He unfolded the laser scanner to map the surface and identify its composition. The instrument hummed softly for a few seconds, then abruptly shut down. Elias tried to turn it on again. Nothing. The battery was full. All systems had been working before. He tried the spectrometer. Same result. The device powered up. Its sensors displayed a momentary explosion of readings far beyond all limits, and then the screen went dead. We tried every instrument we had. Not one of our carefully calibrated, shielded, high-precision tools functioned in the immediate vicinity of the object. They simply shut down, as if entering a zone where the laws of electromagnetism ceased to apply. We were left with only visual observation and the mechanical manipulators. I took one, a metal probe arm about 1 meter long, and carefully brought it toward the crystal's surface. From a distance, the facets had seemed perfectly smooth. Up close, I could see they were covered with a network of microscopic, barely visible patterns. These were not cracks or scratches. They were structures, like capillary networks or leaf veins, but executed with mathematical precision. The patterns were endlessly intricate, weaving, diverging, and converging again, forming fractal motifs that sank into the black material. I could have stared at a single square centimeter for hours, feeling as if I were looking at a map of some unknown universe. I tried touching the surface with the probe's tip. I expected resistance, a solid surface. Instead, nothing happened. The manipulator slid into the crystal without any resistance at all. I froze, not believing my eyes. I pulled the arm back. The metal probe was intact, with no visible trace of contact. I slowly moved it forward again. It slipped into the darkness as easily as a knife into water. No splash, no temperature change, no sound. Elias pointed silently at a small display built into the manipulator. It showed the temperature at the tip of the probe. Absolute zero. Minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. Impossible. Absolute zero is unattainable in nature, a theoretical limit. It certainly could not exist 1 meter away from me in an environment only a few degrees below freezing. The instrument should have failed, but it showed a clear, stable reading. I carefully withdrew the probe. As soon as it crossed the invisible boundary of the surface, the temperature reading instantly returned to normal. I repeated the experiment several times. The result was the same. Inside the object, the temperature was absolute zero, yet it had no thermal interaction with the surrounding environment. It did not freeze the air around it, did not frost over. It simply existed in its own physical regime. Elias, recovering from the shock, decided to walk around the object's base. I stayed where I was, trying to process what we had discovered. Skirting in the opposite direction, I studied the crystal's foundation. Its shape was asymmetrical, yet there was an underlying logic to it, like the complex folds of a protein molecule. It merged seamlessly with the gray floor, as if growing out of it. And then I noticed something at the base. On the rough gray floor, right at the foot of the black structure, lay several objects scattered over a small area, as though dumped from a sack. At first I thought they were stones or fragments of rock, but as I drew closer, I realized they were not. They were artifacts, human artifacts. I saw a stone spearhead, very ancient, Paleolithic. Next to it lay a pottery shard with traces of ornamentation, similar to those found in Mesopotamian excavations. There was a Roman bronze fibula, a cloak clasp, green with age, a roughly forged iron nail like those used in medieval Europe, several glass beads such as Dutch traders once bartered for African gold, a Chinese coin with a square hole in the center, and many other things. They came from different epochs and cultures, separated by thousands of years and thousands of kilometers. I knelt to examine them more closely. They were not replicas, they were originals. I wasn't an archaeologist, but decades at NASA had exposed me to many fields of science. I could tell genuine bronze patina from a fake. I could judge the roughness of ancient stone tools. These items were real, and they were just lying here, on the floor of an artificial cavern 2 kilometers under Antarctic ice. I called Elias over the radio. He joined me and froze. He recognized some of the objects as well. We stared at this absurd collection in silence. How had they gotten here? Who had brought them? Then I noticed something else. Among these ancient artifacts there were more modern items. An empty Mauser rifle cartridge case from World War I, a plastic barrel from a Bic ballpoint pen model introduced in the 1950s. A child's toy, a small red plastic car popular in the 1980s. They were all jumbled together without logic, without chronology. That was when the true horror of the situation began to dawn on me. This wasn't a curated collection or an offering. It looked as if someone, or something, had been randomly plucking ordinary little objects from human history and dropping them here, the way a child gathers pebbles and shells on a beach, guided by some incomprehensible or entirely absent logic. I lifted my head and looked again at Commander O'Neill and his men. They still stood guard 100 meters away, and I understood why they had disarmed and why they knelt. They knew, maybe not everything, but they knew that this object was not a threat in any familiar sense. It was not hostile, it simply was. And these items at its base were not trophies or trash. They were traces of its activity carried on for thousands of years, consisting of subtle, selective interaction with our world. And we had never suspected a thing. My eyes fell on the little red toy car. I remembered having exactly the same one as a child. I lost it during a move when I was 7. Of course, it could not literally be the same car. That would be too absurd a coincidence. But standing there, 2 kilometers under the ice before a structure that broke every known physical law, for the first time in my life I doubted my own understanding of what a coincidence is. A chill ran down my spine. It had nothing to do with ambient temperature. It was the chill of realizing that our entire history, our wars, our cultural achievements, might be nothing but background for someone's incomprehensible, perhaps utterly meaningless activity. We were not masters of this planet. We were background noise. And the dosimeters on O'Neill's men did not measure radiation. They measured attention. Protocol demanded that you zero out your presence so as not to attract that attention, not because it was malicious, but because it was too vast. We did not stay down there long. After Elias and I finished examining the artifacts, O'Neill signaled us to return. We took several photographs with a special film camera they had given us. Digital equipment was as useless down here as all our other gear. Each shot was accompanied by a muted click of the shutter, which seemed like the only sound in that dead space. I shot wide angles while Elias took close-ups of individual objects. Then we gathered our dead instruments and walked in silence back to the lift cage. I turned once more. The black crystal stood at the center of the hall, silent and motionless. It had not reacted to us in any way. We had come, looked, and gone. To it, this meant nothing. The ascent was wordless. No one said a thing. The vibration gradually weakened and vanished as we rose back to the suspended platform at the mouth of the shaft. When the heavy hatch closed behind us, sealing off the chamber below, I felt not relief but a strange, irrational unease. Down there was something incomprehensible but stable, a fact. Up here in our world began the realm of guesswork, interpretation, and lies. Lies were an inevitable part of this equation. We could not simply return and tell the truth. The 30-minute ride up the main shaft felt longer than the descent. I watched Elias. He sat on the platform floor, leaning against the mesh railing, staring at a single point. His face was ashen. As a geologist, he had spent his life dealing with measurable things: pressure, temperature, chemical composition. He studied the planet's history written in stone. And down there he had encountered something that erased the very idea of history and materiality. I was used to anomalies, but mine were distant in space, sets of data, pixels on a screen. This anomaly was here, beneath our feet, interacting with us and with humanity across our entire history. When we emerged at the camp, the same sterile, businesslike atmosphere greeted us. We were led to a decontamination module, though I couldn't imagine what we might be decontaminated from. Our suits were removed, sealed in containers, and carried away. We were given standard military field uniforms and taken back to the same conference room where we had been briefed before the descent. O'Neill was already there, in his usual clothes and unarmed. On the table stood water and simple sandwiches, but neither Elias nor I touched them. "Your preliminary conclusions," O'Neill said without preamble. It was not a question, it was an order. Elias cleared his throat. "Conclusions," his voice was hoarse. "I have no conclusions, only data that contradict each other and everything I know. The physical laws in the immediate vicinity of the object do not work, or they work differently. Spectrometry is impossible. Radiometry is impossible. The temperature inside the structure, according to the contact probe, is absolute zero, which is physically impossible. No heat exchange occurs with the environment. The surface is non-material, at least to objects from our world. It is permeable without resistance. This is not a geological object. It is not an object at all in the way we use that word." He fell silent, searching for words. "And the artifacts," he added finally. "They are complete nonsense. A set of items from different eras with no system. It's like a magpie's nest. If the magpie could travel through time and space and had no idea of the value or purpose of the things it drags home, it defies scientific analysis. It just is." O'Neill listened with an unreadable face, showing neither surprise nor curiosity. He listened the way a superior listens to a routine report. When Elias finished, the commander turned to me. I decided to approach from an operational angle. "From an operational standpoint," I began, forcing myself to sound as dry as possible, "we are dealing with a stable, non-aggressive anomaly. It shows no hostile intent. Its interaction with our world appears passive, observational, or, at most, collecting. The selective removal of insignificant items poses no systemic threat to our technological or social development. However, the mere fact of the object's existence and its capabilities constitutes an existential threat, not because it can harm us, but because knowledge of it would completely change the paradigm of our existence. It nullifies religion, philosophy, and science as we know them. It renders all our aspirations small, local, and insignificant. I paused. I think the Antarctic Treaty is not just a precaution, I said. It is a quarantine. We quarantine not the object but information about it, and that is probably the only correct decision. O'Neill nodded slowly. Your assessment matches previous ones, he said evenly. That sentence scared me more than anything we had seen below. It meant we were not the first. There had been other teams, other scientists, other experts. They had all reached the same conclusion, and they had all kept silent. Where were they now? What had become of them? I did not ask. The commander rose. Your work here is done. In an hour a plane will arrive. You will return to Andrews where Mr. Weiss will meet you. You will give him a full verbal report. You will take no notes. The film from the camera will stay here. Everything you saw and discussed stays here. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement of a new level. Violation will be treated as high treason of the gravest degree. Understood? We nodded. What else could we do? One more question, I said suddenly, not even sure why. Those objects at the base, are they always the same? O'Neill's gaze lingered on me for a moment, and I thought I caught something in his eyes besides duty, something like fatigue, a kind of cosmic weariness. No, he said. They change every few years, sometimes more often. Old ones disappear, new ones appear. We keep a catalog, but we see no pattern. Once a standard 3.5-inch floppy disk appeared. We managed to retrieve it. It was empty, completely demagnetized. 2 years later it was gone, and in its place there was a child's drawing on a piece of cardboard, a yellow house and a sun. He paused. We don't know by what principle it chooses items, but we know one thing: it never takes anything that could seriously affect the course of history. No people, no important documents, no functioning technologies, just trash, our historical trash. Then he left. Elias and I remained alone in the empty conference room at the most secret facility on the planet. We said nothing. There were no words for our condition. We were two scientists who had just been shown that all their science was merely an attempt to describe patterns in the wallpaper of a nursery, while beyond that wall lay something inconceivable. An hour later, as promised, we were in the same Twin Otter heading back to Amundsen, Scott. I stared out the window at the endless white expanse below. It no longer seemed like wilderness. It looked like a lid, an enormous white lid hiding a secret. And the secret was not that we are not alone in the universe. The secret was that we have never been central, not even on our own planet. We are just noisy neighbors living upstairs, while the real owner of the house lives in the basement and occasionally keeps our lost things as souvenirs. The return journey mirrored our arrival, the same C-130, the same faceless Special Forces soldiers, the same shuttered windows. Elias and I sat side by side but did not speak. There was nothing to say. All the words had been spoken down there in O'Neill's presence. Here they felt heavy and useless. I looked at Elias and saw a broken man, not physically, but at some more fundamental, conceptual level. His carefully constructed scientific worldview had collapsed in a single day. He stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, doubting their reality. I felt different, not broken, sterilized. As if something vital had been removed from me. Faith in humanity's importance, perhaps, or simply faith that the world is knowable. At Andrews, we were escorted without any customs or formalities to the same windowless conference room where we had first met Weiss. He sat at the same table in the same suit. It seemed he had not moved during the days we were gone. Beside him sat two men in dark suits I had never seen before. Their faces were utterly bland, lawyers or something worse. Weiss did not ask about our flight. He did not offer coffee. He simply looked at us with his tired, all-knowing eyes and said, "Report." We spoke in turn. First Elias, then I. We recounted everything we had seen in the driest, most factual way we could. The shaft, the chamber, the object, the failed instruments, the permeable surface, absolute zero inside, the jumble of artifacts at the base. We did not interpret, we did not theorize, we just stated facts. Weiss and his associates listened in silence without interruption or questions. Their faces showed no emotion. They were not surprised. They were not shocked. They simply checked our account against what they already knew. We were not pioneers in their eyes. We were another set of sensors lowered into the pit to recalibrate the model. When we finished, Weiss nodded. "Your observations confirm our existing information," he said. "Your interpretation also matches the consensus." One of his aides slid a thick folder of documents and a pen across the table toward us. "This is a new non-disclosure agreement," Weiss continued. "It is perpetual and has no territorial limits. It applies not only to direct transmission of information, but to any indirect hints, works of fiction, or scientific hypotheses that might lead someone to suspect what you saw. You may not discuss this with anyone. No wives, no priests, no therapists. For the rest of the world, your trip to Antarctica never happened. You underwent routine recertification at a classified facility in Nevada. All supporting documents will be placed in your personnel files." He paused, letting it sink in. "This is not just a legal document, gentlemen. It is a condition of your continued existence. From the moment you sign, your life will be under constant but unobtrusive surveillance. Your phone calls, correspondence, financial affairs. We will not interfere, we will only listen. This is not punishment, it is a safety measure. Not for the state, for the species. If you attempt to violate the agreement, you will not be prosecuted. You will simply cease to exist, quietly, without fuss. A heart attack, a traffic accident. You will disappear from the equation. I want you to understand that with absolute clarity." We understood. We signed. Flipping through the pages, I did not dwell on the legal phrases. I was reading my sentence. A sentence to life in a glass cage whose existence only I would know about. Then we were dismissed. The same silent driver in the same black sedan drove me home. When I walked into my house, it felt like I had returned from another world. Ordinary things, the couch, the TV, the stack of newspapers on the coffee table, looked like props, fake, unreal. I lived with that feeling for the rest of my career. I never saw Commander O'Neill or Weiss again. 5 years later, I ran into Elias at a conference in San Francisco. He had aged dramatically. He had left Caltech, citing health issues, and was now teaching an elective geology course at a small college in Oregon. We shook hands and exchanged a few meaningless remarks about the weather, but in his eyes I saw the same fear and emptiness. We both knew, but we could not speak. We were members of the most exclusive and most miserable club on Earth. 3 years later, I read his obituary in the paper. Official cause of death, massive stroke. He was only 62. I stayed at NASA until retirement. My work lost all meaning. I oversaw projects searching for traces of life on Mars, analyzing exoplanet atmospheres, knowing that the greatest mystery was not billions of light years away, but beneath a thin crust of ice on our own planet. All those grand projects seemed like children's games in a sandbox. We hunted for bacteria under rocks on another world while something in our own basement collected epochs. The dissonance nearly drove me mad, but I learned to live with it. I became a good administrator, cynical, efficient, and utterly indifferent to the outcomes. Now, as I said, I am 82. I have long been retired. The unobtrusive surveillance has become background noise in my life, like rain on the window. I know that this story I am recording on an old tape recorder is never meant to be heard. But I must record it, at least for myself, to put my thoughts in order before the end. Knowledge of the object did not make my life worse, it made it different. I began to take an interest in history, not wars and empires, but small everyday details. I read about what nails Roman legionaries used to build their camps, what patterns decorated the pottery of Saddle-Huruk, what toys Viking children played with. In each of these things I saw a potential candidate for that strange collection. Our civilization no longer looked to me like a great tree of progress, but like an enormous garbage heap from which an invisible hand occasionally plucks a trinket or two. And here is the disturbing detail, the true end of my story. It is not that I fear someone will come for me. I am too old to care. It is something else. Several years ago, sorting through the archive of my late grandfather, I found his diary. He had been a naval officer and in 1912 served as cartographer on one of the early British Antarctic expeditions. It was an obscure mission, not as famous as Scott or Amundsen. They were mapping the coast and part of the ice sheet. The diary described daily life, weather, hardships, but one entry, dated August 1912, made my blood run cold. They had set up a temporary camp inland to conduct seismic measurements. The spot on the map roughly matched the location of our secret site. My grandfather wrote the following. I remember it word for word. Strange place here. The silence is absolute, even the wind seems to stop and no echo returns. At night, when the ice cracks hardest from the frost, you feel a faint low tremor through the soles of your boots. It does not frighten, it lulls as if something enormous were sleeping beneath us. Lieutenant Armstrong jokes that we've pitched camp on the back of a sleeping whale, but it does not resemble a living creature's breathing. It is more like the hum of a machine idling. I reread those lines dozens of times. 1912, 86 years before my trip, decades before satellites, ground-penetrating radar, or secret programs. A simple factual note in a field cartographer's diary, and in it, everything, the unnatural silence and the low-frequency vibration. What truly frightens me is not that they noticed it, but how they described it. The hum of a machine idling, as if something enormous were sleeping. They were closer to the truth than we are, with all our technology, because they weren't trying to measure it. They simply felt it. I realized then that the quarantine around that place had always existed, unofficial, natural. People reached it, felt it, and left because they instinctively knew it was not for them. We, in the 20th century, with our pride and our instruments, decided we could understand it. We drilled through the ice and peered inside. And the only thing we were capable of doing afterward was slamming the door in terror and posting guards around it, not to protect the object from us, but to protect us from one simple fact that is lethal to human self-importance. We live in someone else's house. The owner simply doesn't pay attention to us. That's all.